Our webinar focuses on Crime Victims' Rights 101, which is an overview. So we hope that you can take this information back and use it for yourself, use it for your organizations to assist victims now and in the future. I'd like to, again, thank our panelists who took the time out today to join us. We're very excited about the information you're going to bring to us. And also, I'd like to thank our CVI research assistant, Crystal Hernandez, who coordinated our webinar, and Myra Pina, who is our CVI research administrative associate, who assisted us as well in coordinating this event. So at any time you feel like you may be triggered by any of the information that you hear or examples that may be presented during this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us directly via chat, and we can offer assistance to you that you may need. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Crystal Hernandez. She's going to moderate this event, and she will give you additional information that you need. Again, thank you for your attendance, and we hope that you find the information useful, informative, that you can use and take back to your organization. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dr. Bro. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Crystal Hernandez, and I'm the Graduate Research Assistant here at the Crime Victims Institute. Before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that this session is being recorded, and I wanted to provide an overview of how this webinar will go. So you'll hear from each panelist for about 15 minutes, and then the last 10 minutes of each presentation will be dedicated to a Q&A session. If you have any questions as you hear from each presenter, feel free to enter them in the chat or the Q&A box. Both will be monitored by myself along with Dr. Bro, and we will do our best to get through all of the submitted questions. Additionally, near the end of the webinar, I'll be sharing the link to our post-webinar survey. We'd really appreciate if all attendees could fill out this post-webinar survey to have your attendance recorded, share any comments or feedback, and receive a certificate of participation. And so now it is my absolute pleasure to turn it over to our first speaker and presenter, Professor Meg Garvin, who is a professor at the Lewis and Clark Law School and Executive Director of the National Crime Victim Law Institute. Thanks so much for being here, Meg. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, both for having me, but also having this event. It is so wonderful to see statewide conversations about this, and then as someone based in a different state to get to hear and learn alongside you is super fun for me, and so I'm really grateful. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. Someone who is an organizer can let me know if it's not showing properly, otherwise I'll proceed. I'm going to talk a lot about state and federal, the legal landscape, like what's happening with the actual rights. And the reason I'm starting there is because that's my practice. And what do I mean by that? I am a law professor at Lewis and Clark Law School, where I teach victims in criminal procedure, which is an upper division criminal law class. But I also run the National Crime Victim Law Institute, which is a nonprofit that provides direct legal services to crime victims sometimes, but more often we support other lawyers providing those legal services. And those legal services are not protective order services. They're not family law services. They're not lawsuit services. They are services for the victim in the criminal case, directly representing the victim on their rights in that case. It is known as rights enforcement. And so that's what I'm going to talk about, is what does that look like across this country as rights have evolved over the last 30 plus, well, really 50 plus years. So I'm going to have us do, I think you have access to a chat box. I'm hoping that you do. It looks like you do. I have 3 iterations of phrasing on the slide, and I'm going to read them out loud for those of you that may not be able to read them as easily. I have victims' rights spelled victim singular apostrophe S rights. I have victims' rights plural, so it's S apostrophe rights. And then I have victim rights. And using the chat box, tell me which of these resonate most with you. And maybe if you can type in enough to say why too. So which of these resonates with you and why? And I'm just going to let the chat fill for a second. And some of you, it looks like you can chat directly to me, which is great. Some of you maybe can chat to everyone. All of them. Yes. Well, what's interesting is each one I would predict would resonate slightly differently depending on context. And for me, as I think about victims' rights enforcement and the notion of where we are in the evolution of victims' rights, what I want to flag is that the apostrophe matters. In Western European English, right, that then became American English, apostrophe means what? It can mean a contraction, right, a shortened way of doing things, but it also most often ends up meaning in this context, ownership. Someone owns something. The apostrophe tells us who owns something. And so when you put the apostrophe on victims' rights, you are either saying an individual victim owns something or a collective group of victims own something. So for me, when I'm thinking about victims' rights and where we have gone through history, when I have a client, it is a single person who owns a right. And when someone owns a right, they get to tell me what happens with that right. Under the law, no one can act on someone else's right without their informed consent. So when someone owns a right, we have to ask them, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to exercise it? Do you want to waive it? What would you like to have happen here? And we have to elicit that information in order to know how to proceed. That's what we do with an accused person's rights. That's what we do with other person's rights. And that's the point of the modern victims' rights movement. There is a long tradition of victim involvement in our criminal legal system in this country, going back to pre-constitutional moments in the colonies, right? And then the Constitution was put in place and victims were still deeply involved. It eroded a little bit into the 1970s, and then the modern victims' rights movement was born, right? Because lots of social movement groups came together and said, wait, the criminal legal system is really not treating individual human beings very well, right? Whether that is a person of color, a woman, a wealthy white person, right? All together, victims in the system were being treated as an evidentiary moment. And all those social movements started to come together and say, we need to collectively fix that. We need to fix it specifically for some folks more than others. But generally speaking, in the 1970s, our criminal legal system had really relegated victims to a role of evidence. We'll call you when we need you as a witness. That's it. That was it, right? And so it was the idea of how do we overcome this legacy of exclusion and silencing? And the methods that the victims' rights movement came up with were to pass laws that codified things that the community identified they would want to see happen in the system. And it does not matter where you are in the country. The rights look generally the same. They look generally like the ones that are on this slide. The right to due process, fairness, dignity, respect, to some type of privacy, to confer or consult with a prosecution, to notice of critical stages, to be present, to be heard at certain moments of the process, to speedy disposition or proceedings free from unreasonable delay, and to restitution. These are the most common rights that exist in our laws across this country, and you can find them somewhere. Sometimes they're in state constitution, like Texas has many of this in constitution. Some are in statute. When you're thinking about law, the weightier laws are found in the Constitution. Then come statutes, then come rules. And why that matters is when two constitutional rights, for instance, those of an accused and those of a victim, have to be weighed in an analysis by a court. If they're at the same level, they're closer to equal weight, right? And we have to figure out what happens. Statutes would be a little less in terms of weight, but we can find these rights everywhere. And the goal, right? The goal of these, right? It was to overcome this legacy of exclusion and silencing. That's the negative articulation of the goal of victims' rights. The positive articulation of the goal of victims' rights is reimagination of the system completely. The very first case that went up to a federal appellate court on victims' rights after the Federal Crime Victims' Rights Act was passed in 2004, it made it up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And in the case, I'm not going to give you too much of the facts, but it was a financial fraud case. The victim had wanted to be heard at sentencing before sentence was imposed. And that was their right. They had the right to be notified, present, and heard. And what happened is there were two sentencings. In one sentence for the first defendant, everything went really well. In the second, the victim, Mr. Kenna, was not heard. He was notified, he was in the courtroom, but no one let him speak despite him asking for it. And he took an appeal. It went up to the appellate court and he said through his lawyer, this is a violation of my rights and there should be a remedy here. And the court remedied it by undoing the sentence, and I'll talk about that later. But B said this powerful statement. The criminal justice system has long functioned on the assumption that crime victims should behave like good Victorian children, seen but not heard. The Crime Victims' Rights Act, which is the federal equivalent of the same laws Texas has, right, sought to change this by making victims independent participants in the criminal justice system. That's what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, that's a federal court that oversees basically the very western part of the United States, said about the federal law. And state laws have been starting to be interpreted the same way. I say starting because it's an evolution. Rights are just words on paper until someone starts asking for them in courts, right? And so the innovations in the law of this century, as laws have been written and as they have been litigated by lawyers for victims predominantly, and sometimes by prosecutors, right? But prosecutors, their client is the state, wonderfully, because the whole community needs a lawyer, right? But as they've been litigated, they've started to leverage these innovations, right? The notion that victims have standing, they do have the apostrophe, either explicitly in the law, it'll say the victim or their lawyer can assert, or implicitly in law under a traditional standing analysis. You all have an interesting Court of Criminal Appeals case that says maybe you do, maybe you don't. I have anyone who wants to challenge that. I have clear arguments why you still have standing in Texas on your rights, as I'm sure other presenters do. But the other innovations are the opportunity to seek appellate review, because appellate courts tell trial courts what to do. They're the boss of the trial court. And then a judicial duty to enforce rights. Those were the innovations that started to come into play to make rights meaningful, because we can comply with rights as best we want, but enforcement is about, in this moment, right now, how do we make this right meaningful? And that usually means a lawyer together with an advocate working on behalf of a victim in the current case. And there are so many remedies. People are often like, well, there's no remedy for a violation of victims' rights. And I just beg to differ on that. And I will share later a handout. I'll make sure I get it circulated to registrants about all the types of remedies. But legally, right, we may not be able to seek monetary damages for violation of rights, but we can ask people to stop doing what they're doing in the moment. Quash a subpoena. Continue this hearing because to go forward be in violation of rights, right? Those are stop remedies. Do-over remedies are, you already violated my right, we have to do that proceeding over again. That's what happened in the Kenna case, and it's happened all over the country with different rights. I hearken to the lawyers in Texas to have it start happening more there, right? And then we can ask for ethics violations. There are several cases that have come down where ethics violations for the lawyers who didn't really pay attention to the rights can be brought, and we found those, right? I put that last because we don't want to go there, right? Because people are trying their best. And as long as they're trying their best, that's great, but we need enforcement in the moment. And what I'll say is there are so many examples of this happening. What we have on the screen are 4 things that I would say I personally, and with my very close network of colleagues that I work with, litigate regularly. Subpoenas for cell phones, diaries, medical records. The victim exercising their right to privacy or protection or to refuse discovery, however it's phrased in the jurisdiction, can move to quash the subpoena. Independently. Prosecution can also, but the victim has the apostrophe if they want it. The victim, when they're told we reached a plea deal yesterday and we're presenting it to the judge today, can ask for a stop remedy of continue this hearing. Victims put on a witness list and told they can't be present, right? When you have the right to be present, there's a high hurdle to keep someone out of the courtroom. And in fact, no federal court has ever found that a victim's presence violates an accused's right to a fair trial, right? So we have all of these, the victim's right to be heard at sentencing, right? Asking for a different hearing. Those are things that happen. And you might be thinking, well, do they really happen? In the materials, you'll have citations for cases, these that are on the slide here, I'm not going to go into. These all are cases on different states' rights that look very similar to Texas, where remedy of a do-over was afforded, right? Including as recently as last year. And many people start to say, oh, you know, I get it, but it can't really happen here, right? We have different law. And what I would say to you is that law evolves, law changes. Victims' rights were meant to overcome this legacy of exclusion, to put victims back in the conversation, not in control of the whole thing, right? The whole thing being criminal legal system, but back in the conversation so that it can be part of constructing justice, right? Whatever that means for them, right? Which often is different than what the state wants. And there's case law that shows victims' rights can evolve the law, right? The examples that you'll have in the materials, one is from Alaska from way back in 2011, and one is just from 2020 in Arizona. Two very different locations, two very different sets of laws, but they all have this, they both have those rights that are on that tree. And in both situations, they said, well, despite the fact that the law has done X, whatever X is in the case, ab initio in one and a restitution cap in the other, despite the fact that decades worth of law says victims don't get something, because victims' rights were put on the books in the state constitution, we have to rethink the law. And so it created change. So for me, as I close out, what is needed moving forward on victims' rights, right? So I've given a little overview. I have a bit of a call to action, right? As we think about this, we need to be really creative. We need to not settle for victims and instead think, what does my survivor that I'm working with need? And then let me go try. I will try remedies. I'm going to think really big. I'm not going to think that I can't do something. I'm going to think I can until the law explicitly tells me I cannot do something. And then once I know that, I go to the legislature and I try and fix it, right? And then the last thing is, there is never a failure, right? As long as we are transparent with survivors about what we are trying to achieve with them, then there cannot be a failure. There can only be a lesson as we continue to evolve victims' rights. And that's really where I believe we need to go. And I am, before we move to questions, I am going to put in a plug. If you want to learn more, CVI has a conference coming up that is both virtual and in person. In person is up in Portland, Oregon, but there is a ton from experts virtually. And I will stop here and see if we have any questions.
Thank you so much, Meg, for that wonderful, really, really informative presentation. I think we can all agree that that was really, really helpful. Attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free. Don't be shy. We have a really valuable resource here with Meg. I have received a couple here just via direct message, and so I'll go ahead and ask this first one for you, Meg. Where do you see the victims' rights movement going, like in this next 10 to 15 years? You've talked about how they evolve, it's a change. And so just anything that you wanted to share or add about that.
So I have hopes, right? I'm not sure, I never predict, but my hopes of where we go is that the victims' rights movement really starts to embrace that it is a legal movement as well as a services movement. And that as a legal movement, the rights are not treated as optional and niceties, but instead we embrace that we can demand them. And by demanding them, I mean ask for them through legal process and really try to take those words on paper and fill them up with meaning. So what I hope is that we start to see the legal side of the victims' rights movement. And a corollary to that is I hope that we start to embrace lawyers for victims more, including appointing lawyers for victims more. There are so many vulnerable victims, and to ask them to have to incur costs to activate their rights is just fundamentally wrong to me. So I hope those are the two places we go.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Meg. Somebody asked about the conference date, so I just want to make sure that's correct. It's May 19th through the 19th through 21st, right?
It is. The 19th is in person only, at least right now we're looking at, and that's about hate and bias crimes and trauma-informed services for hate and bias. And then the full conference that has all the breakout sessions is the 20th and 21st.
Awesome, thank you. I do have another question that I received. Can you share what is the biggest challenge that you've encountered just throughout your time working, in your practice? Anything that you can share about just any challenges or hurdles that you've experienced with the work that you do helping survivors?
Yeah, so I would put them in a couple of buckets, the challenges. So one bucket is kind of the public perception, including survivors' perception of rights, which is they don't know them, right? So if we walk down the street right now in almost any community in the country, if that community has had access to like TV, right? Any sort of pop culture, and we ask them to recite their rights as an accused person. If they were pulled over by police and were being detained, they would be able to recite them. If you go down the same street in communities in this country and ask, what are your rights under your state constitution? They can't recite them. And so we have like a disconnect where people don't know they have rights, and so they don't ask for them. And there's this beautiful quote from Boutros Boutros-Ghali from years ago when he was the head of the United Nations. He said, right, the starting point of any human rights movement is knowledge that you have rights. So we have to start by knowing that we have rights. So that's the community or survivor hurdle. I would say there's also a hurdle in that same space that people think that the prosecutor is the victim's lawyer and that they'll always align. And I think that does a disservice to the really big job that prosecutors have. And so we have to overcome that hurdle. They often can work for survivors, but they have a different job, and we need to really honor that. And then the last thing is standing. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times people tell me, like, Meg, you cannot do what you say you do, right? You don't have standing, which is a legal term, to come into court and file papers. And as a law professor, I just want to tell like those lawyers who say that to me, like, go back to first year of law school, because in fact, we do. So there's different hurdles for me, though. All of this is like, when a survivor asks for something of the system, again, we try to make it happen.
Thanks so much for that, Meg. Speaking of law school, we did get a question about just if you have any advice for either like students who are wanting to go maybe into law school, or even current practitioners or people working in the field who might want, I don't know, like a career change or thinking about, switching, maybe going to law school. Do you have any advice that you could share?
You absolutely can email me. I will make sure my personal email is in there, because I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone about law school. I think I'm in a rare moment of being very proud of my profession generally right now, as my profession steps up in time of need, mostly. And it is an amazing profession to be in, and to get to do survivor rights is like we always talk about vicarious trauma. This field is all about vicarious resilience for me. I am a more resilient human being for having done this work with these amazing folks. So the advice I would have is think about whether you are in a space right now that you can give your service to someone else as their lawyer, because you have to carry their story with you, and that can be really hard. And then B, what kind of lawyer do you want to be in the trenches, meaning in trial courts, where basically you often are tilting at windmills over and over. In an appellate court where you're helping create precedent, right? Like what kind of lawyer? And then let's find you the right law school or the right position. And I'll put my email in because I'd love to partner on that.
Thank you so much, Meg. If there are no more questions, I'm trying to make sure that I checked the chat in the Q&A box. Meg has to hop off the call and she has to teach class because she's amazing and does all the things. And so if there are no more questions for Meg, then, we just want to thank you, Meg, for, taking the time to share everything that you did. And we really, really appreciate your expertise. So thank you.
Thank you. And I get to stay on and learn for a while. So
Perfect.
I'll be on learning for a bit.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, so then we can go ahead and move on to our next presenter. We want to be mindful of everyone's time, and so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. We're super grateful to have Nicole Kinney here with us today. And like with the last presentation, if you have any questions for Nicole as she's speaking and sharing, please feel free to enter them into the chat, and we'll do our best to get through them. And so Nicole is going to be sharing her perspective, and so it's my pleasure to go ahead and turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for giving me an opportunity to share my story. I was reluctant to do it as a survivor because I just, that term could be, I don't know, maybe limiting, I guess, in a way. So, but I think that after sharing my story, I think the possibility of helping others is far greater than anything that could be associated with the survivor's title. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my story today. I stand before you not just as a survivor, but as someone who has learned that our deepest wounds can become our greatest source of strength and purpose. Like many of us, my story begins at home. I grew up in an environment where abuse was present, where physical violence shaped my understanding of relationships. I witnessed my mom being abused, brutally beaten, with no remorse and no regard for her life or ours. Um, Her teeth were knocked out with a gun because my stepdad was so angry that his fist just couldn't do enough damage. My mom couldn't defend herself. Instead, she took that rage and that pent up aggression out on me. You know, she beat me many times. She beat me so bad I laid motionless on the ground. And instead of helping me up, she used the last bit of anger and frustration to quite literally stand and stomp on my head. I was her daughter, her firstborn, and I took the abuse. I took the abuse so that my sister didn't have to. And I never told a soul. I never stood up for myself. And unfortunately, that was my mom showing me that love hurts, that loved ones physically, mentally, and psychologically harm you on occasion, and there's nothing you can do about it. This was my normal, and I'm here to tell you that that is not normal. When I left home, I thought I was escaping, and instead, I walked straight into another form of abuse, and one that was harder to recognize, harder to name, but just as devastating. I married my college sweetheart, my first real boyfriend, and slowly the psychological abuse became my new normal. This is what many don't understand about abuse. It's not always bruises and broken bones. Sometimes it's broken spirits and shattered self worth. It's the quiet erosion of who you are, one cruel word and one manipulation at a time. The psychological abuse was insidious. Like water dripping on a stone, it wore away at my sense of self worth. I could barely recognize who I was anymore. And then, when I was at my most vulnerable, the abuse escalated to physical and sexual assault. Even when I found the courage to leave, it led to post separation abuse. He plotted and schemed to try and break me in a way he wasn't able to before. 13 years after our divorce, he took my daughter away. When his physical and psychological and sexual abuse was not enough, he took my daughter from me, my firstborn, the one person that showed me what true unconditional love was, and I had to grieve my child that was alive and well. My worst nightmare, and I can guarantee it's most mothers' worst nightmare come true. And I say we just because, like him, I have to be honest, I didn't know either. I didn't know that I am stronger and more resilient than he or I could have ever imagined. I decided to fight for my daughter. I decided laying down and taking the abuse was no longer an option. I had to show my daughter what I was not shown. I had to love, protect, and fight for myself and those that I love the most. I decided not only to fight back, but to empower, educate, and uplift every survivor I came across, and I encourage them to do the same. I'd like to share some stark realities with you. According to RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. Think about that for a minute. In the time I've been speaking, someone has become a victim. But what's even more heartbreaking is that research shows that over 60% of women don't even recognize their experience as sexual assault, even when it meets the legal definition. They've been conditioned to doubt themselves, to minimize their experiences, and to believe that they're overreacting. They are not. You are not. I was one of those women. I didn't want to believe what was happening to me. I made excuses. I blamed myself. And I know I'm not alone in this. Studies reveal that about 70 to 90% of female rape or sexual assault survivors know their perpetrator. It's not usually strangers in dark alleys like we think. It's the people we trust, the people we love, and the people who should protect us. To every young woman out there who is questioning whether what happened to them was really assault, it was, and I believe you. If you've ever felt pressured, coerced, or forced into sexual activity, whether through physical force, emotional manipulation, or the inability to consent, that is assault. Full stop. You are not being dramatic. You are not misunderstanding the situation. Your boundaries and your body matter. To our law enforcement officials and our victim advocates, we need to understand that only 40% of rape and sexual assaults were reported to police in recent years. I believe in 2017 we were looking at 40%, but in 2018 it was only 25%. Think about that. That's less than half. If we go with the 2017 numbers, that's 40%. That's less than half of sexual assault victims reporting their crime. Why? And you ask yourself why, and I believe it's because survivors face disbelief, victim blaming, and minimization of their experiences. We need to do better. The impact of not being believed is devastating, and research shows that when sexual assault survivors aren't believed by authorities, it creates additional trauma and long-lasting health impacts. We are not just dealing with assault itself, we're dealing with the trauma of having our truth questioned or dismissed. But there is hope. There is healing. I know that firsthand. And it starts with understanding that healing isn't linear. Some days you'll feel strong, other days you'll feel like giving up, but you don't, you start over, and that's okay. What matters is that you keep going. To anyone currently in an abusive situation, please hear me when I say this. It does not get better. In fact, it gets worse. What starts as psychological abuse often escalates. So trust your instincts. That voice inside your head that is saying something isn't right, listen to it. You deserve better. We all do. Learning to love ourselves isn't selfish, it's survival. Setting boundaries isn't mean, it's necessary. And saying no isn't wrong, it's your right. And seeking help isn't weakness, it's courage in its purest form. To my fellow survivors, the shame you carry isn't yours to bear. You've endured enough. You've already blamed yourself enough. It's time to show yourself the grace you so freely give to others because your story matters, your voice matters, and you matter. And to those working with survivors, believe us. When we find the courage to speak, believe us. When we struggle to leave, understand us. And when we finally break free, support us. The journey from victim to survivor isn't a straight line, and we need your patience, your understanding, and your unwavering support along the way. I stand here today, not because my story is unique, but because it isn't. I speak because silence serves only those who abuse. I share my pain, hoping it will give others permission to share theirs. And most importantly, I stand here because every person deserving of love, respect, and safety needs to know that they're not alone. Let's work together to recognize abuse in all of its forms, to support survivors in all of their stages of healing, and to create a world where love doesn't hurt and home means safety. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We really, really appreciate you sharing your story. So honest, so raw, and so we really, really do appreciate you highlighting, your perspective and your journey. It really means a lot to everyone here on the call, and so thank you so much for your bravery, your courage. It really does not go unappreciated. And so I just wanted to take a moment and see if there's any questions in the chat for Nicole. Everyone is just thanking you. And so we can see, it really does mean a lot to hear from you, to hear from your, just thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. And so I did have a question that I received. And so if you don't mind, we were just wondering, the person that submitted this question is, how would you like to see victims' rights change or evolve in the future? Do you have any thoughts on that, how you would like to see victims' rights or survivors' rights change over the years?
I don't have anything. I think the most important thing is believing the victim when they come forward, um, um, understanding the trauma behind the abuse, understanding the complexities that are there, um, and learning with us. But most importantly is just listening, understanding, and believing us, and um, working to better help others come forward. I mean, there's a reason we are not coming forward. There's a reason that we would rather deal with this internally and with ourselves than to bring it forward. And you have to ask yourself why and what we can do to I guess remedy that. And I think it starts with listening, believing, and understanding the trauma that has occurred.
Thank you so much for that. Just another question related, just based on your own experience. Do you think that there are any areas where you felt that your rights could have maybe been elevated or maybe brought to your attention a little bit better, just as you were, trying to seek help? Do you think that there are any areas where maybe your victims, your rights could have been, kind of brought up to your attention a little bit better? You're still muted, Nicole, sorry.
I'm sorry. Absolutely. So with my situation, I did report the crimes to law enforcement, and thankfully the police officers who I was the detectives I was working with, they believed me. Unfortunately, when it came to trial, I think Meg had said sometimes the prosecutor just has a different goal, and so I kind of was overlooked. I wasn't informed, and he got away with everything he did, and I think it empowered him to do what he did 13 years after our divorce because there was no consequences. Um, there was no punishment for what he did. I mean, um, it was kind of like I instead of having to go through everything that I went through publicly, it made me feel as though it would have been better to just not have reported it at all. And I think, and I know, I don't think I know that I'm not alone in that.
Thanks so much for sharing that and for your honesty. I did receive another question, and so if you don't mind, this is for as a survivor working with advocates, besides being heard and believed, what is one thing that you believe is really important in that survivor advocate relationship?
I think, I think it's hard to say. I mean, aside from listening, because it's just it's so complex. Like the understanding the trauma behind it. I think just um, being tra- being trauma informed and knowing um, how every one person is different, and so just kind of like learning each individual's story, and how it shapes them and them as a survivor, them as an individual, but like just really digging deep and understanding the deep rooted trauma that is often associated or with the survivor. So I guess being trauma informed would be my answer.
That makes sense. Thank you so much, Nicole. And I did have another question. It looks like we still have some time. And so if there are any others, please feel free to keep sending them. This is regarding the media. And so just in your own opinion, how do you think the media has kind of shaped or influenced victims' rights and the way that victims decide or maybe they don't decide to seek help or to exercise their rights?
I think, well, it's supposed to be unbiased, right? You're supposed to just to deliver the story, deliver the news, and then and then it's us as a collective and how it's up to us on who we believe, what we believe in, and what we're and what we do with the information. I do believe that um, there are a few like high profile cases that come to mind, and it's like just the the failure to understand victims, the failure to understand um, the trauma and the psychological things that we go through. I don't think that the media, it's not that I don't know if it's their job to understand that when conveying or relaying the information, as it pertains to victims and the abuse that was done to them. I think that the problem really is society as a whole and just not understanding, kind of going more with the getting over it, right? Or I can't really say how media has played a factor positively or negatively, as it pertains to the topic at hand. I think that this is more of a societal issue, something that we just need to really educate others about. And I feel like that is why it took me so long to speak out, but I did so because I think that the more we can educate, the more that the more we talk about it, the more that we bring awareness to situations, um, society would be better informed and better educated on the situation. And I think more importantly, that is what we should focus on, as opposed to the way in which media is presenting it to us.
That makes sense. Thank you so much, Nicole. It looks like we have time for a couple more questions, and I do have one related to what you were just speaking on, and so I'll share that one first. Can you talk about like what was the point that gave you courage and confidence to start publicly sharing your story? Was there anything that you can kind of identify as like the turning point for you?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I was physically abused by my mother and my ex-husband. I was sexually abused by my ex-husband and friends that I thought were my close friends. But most importantly, it was losing my daughter. It was having her ripped away from me and not being able to be in the same home with her to protect her, to guide her. Like I said, a mother's worst nightmare is losing their child. Um, but I didn't realize that I could lose my child who was alive and well. I didn't know that I could grieve somebody who was still alive. And how was I going to protect her from my abuser? And because I do believe that when you abuse the mother, you are directly abusing the child. And so it was without a doubt the love I have for my daughter, and the willingness and the wanting, the eagerness, I guess, to I there was a time where I couldn't speak to her, and it was like, how would I warn her against the abusers like her father? How can I get her to understand that what he's doing and has done is not right? And it was like, well, if I can't talk and speak directly to her, I can speak and talk directly to hundreds and thousands of other women who may be able to hear me, to hear my voice, and to get out of the situation, or to fight through the situation, and to regain their strength and know that they're resilient, that they're powerful, and that you cannot let anyone take that power from you. And that is what motivated me. That is what has inspired me to do this, and to continue doing it. It wasn't what has happened to me, but it was wanting to prevent that happening to my daughter and anyone else.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing that. It looks like we have one more question, and then maybe we can wrap up here. But this is just relating to what can be done differently. And so are there specific things that advocates could do differently or more effectively to make a positive impact in the lives of survivors?
Absolutely. I think, like I said before, just um, knowing statistics, just knowing what you know about survivors and the different. I mean, there are survivors of. I spoke just specifically on sexual assault and like the home and the home abuse, but it's um, I think just understanding that every victim is different, every situation is different, learning about each victim and each situation that they have gone through, and really wanting to understand them, what they're going through, and what they have been through to guide them, um, and to educate them and to give them resources that can help them get out of a situation that they may not even know that they're in. I think that is extremely important, because for so long I didn't know that what I was in was abuse. I didn't know that it was quite honestly worse than the physical abuse that I had endured. Like, I would have gone and done that a million times over to not feel the emotional and psychological abuse that I felt. So just kind of understanding abuse in all of its forms, identifying it, um, recognizing it, and showing the victim, the survivor, a way out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Let's see. Okay, so we have one more question and then last question for you, Nicole. So are there any resources or programs that you utilized to kind of help you get out of your situation that you'd be willing to share or to talk about?
I will say that it was, like I said before, it was my resilience. It was me. I had other, it was learning, getting in touch with myself. It was personal development, self-development, therapy. Therapy has helped me tremendously to see what wasn't normal, what is not normal, what I should not have um, had to endure, like that my norm wasn't the norm. And so I think that mental health is huge, and identifying the issues there, and counseling and therapy is 100% something that would be extremely beneficial. But it starts with you. I think it starts with you, and knowing that you're ready for a change, knowing that you're no longer wanting to have to go through what you're going through. And I believe that it starts with you. Um, and so to know that you are powerful, you are resilient, dig deep, and with the help of counseling and therapists, they could help.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We really, really appreciate you again for sharing your story, for taking the time to provide your insights just from a survivor's perspective. Like we really do appreciate you. And so thanks again from all of us. We really appreciate your time. And so we do want to, be mindful of everyone's time. And so we can go ahead and move on to our next presenter. And so up next for you all, we have Celestina Grande. And so thank you so much for being here with us today. And like with the last presentation, if you have any questions for Celeste, please feel free to go enter them into the chat or in the Q&A box. And so without further ado, Celeste, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? Good, we're all good. All right, thank you. So I'll share a little bit of information. I will be honest with you. This is my first Zoom presentation, so thank you for the invitation. And so what I want to do is kind of just go over what a victim advocate does here within our agency. I am with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. I have been a victim advocate with the Sheriff's Office for about 3 years. And so Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your story. It resonates very, very familiar with what we do here. And I really hope that whatever agency it was that you worked with was able to connect you with some resources and to, I guess, empower you, because what you endured is very familiar to what we see on a regular, unfortunately. As far as advocacy goes, we are making tremendous leaps and bounds within the criminal justice system and within law enforcement, where it was not always present. It is now, and it is something that we go beyond just with the case being filed, whether or not the district attorneys accept charges. We are still going to work with a survivor, a victim, anybody who reaches out to our agency for assistance. And we don't close that door. We don't. You can contact me when it occurs, whether or not I responded to a case on scene, which means we go on call out with patrol. So if it's an active case and a law enforcement is out there, as long as it's secured and the offender has been located or they're in custody, we are out there. We are on call, and we provide those shelters. We provide that safety for them. We ensure that basic needs are for their, sometimes there's kids involved. So there's a tremendous amount of what we do and what goes into how we help our victims and survivors and our families and anybody who comes across our office. Oftentimes we get calls from individuals who may have been victimized, and unfortunately it might not be a case that our office is handling or our jurisdiction. That doesn't deter the fact that we're here to help. We're going to pass on the knowledge that they're inquiring about. So that is something that I pride myself on, and know that anybody who reaches out for help, that's a big step for them. That's a big step, and maybe the biggest step. So to say that, hey, you're not within my jurisdiction, or your case is not with me, that's not an end all for me. I want to be able to help you with any way that I can. So that's just a little bit about me. In our office, there are 7 advocates. We have designations of kind of what we work on. There are 2 of us that work on homicide cases and violent crimes. We're one of the largest counties, the largest county. So with being the largest county and only 7 of us, sometimes we're spread a little thin, but we do what we can. And I can honestly tell you that you come into being an advocate, you have to have that embedded within you, that you want to be that helping hand, because that is what we're here for. So we assist with violent crimes, we assist with homicide cases, sexual assault cases, human trafficking, and domestic violence is going to be one of our biggest caseloads that we do handle. And our door never closes. I mean, you kind of have to meet the survivors and the victims where they are. They may not be ready to talk. They may not be ready to seek out your help at that particular time. So we have to be understanding of that. And sometimes it could be a year later. Sometimes it could be, immediate, depending on the situation. But you want to be able to empower the survivors and the families so that they can go on and they can be self-sufficient. Sometimes they're in a situation where the financial aspect of it is what's keeping them there. They don't have any other means. They're not citizens of our country, and we have to help them with those things as well. And I think that's part of the evolution that I would like to get towards, to help victims understand. We don't look at your citizenship. That doesn't take a precedence to any kind of assistance that we give. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell. I truly enjoy working with survivors. My main caseload is homicide and violent crimes. So typically I'm working with families of homicide victims and helping them to, secure funeral arrangements. And sometimes it goes even into minimal things as finding clothes for their surviving children. Because this is not something that maybe grandma or grandpa or whoever the family member is that's taken them in was prepared for. Nobody's prepared for that. And so we reach out to organizations and we put things in place for them, especially for safety. And we help them along the way with connecting them with resources in their community, school-based resources. We connect them with, the district attorney's office and the coordinators that are going to be overseeing their cases so that they can help them with victim impact statements. So there's a lot of connecting that we do. Our services that we can offer are vast and they're broad. But at the end of the day, sometimes we're just a listening ear. We're just a listening ear, and we welcome that because we are attached to law enforcement. Oftentimes survivors and families don't want to talk to us because they think if they cooperate with us and they talk to us, that it might hurt the perpetrator, because we have to understand they're in a relationship with them. Some of them are not ready to leave. Some of them are not ready to have an arrest made. They just maybe needed help right then in the heat of the moment. So we have to be understanding, and we have to meet them where they are, meet the victim where they are, meet that family where they are, and just be supportive. So I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit of an overview. As an advocate, we do go out to the academy when our new recruits are going through their training, our patrol officers, our sheriff deputies, and we provide them with information so that they know they have a resource to fall back on, to use, to hold in their toolkit when they're out on those scenes and they don't know what to do. We have a family, we don't have anywhere for them to go. And, who do I call? So we give them this as a tool. We go and we present this. So I'll go ahead and share now. Okay, all right. We good? Can you see that? All right. So, okay, I'm on the way. Yep. All righty. So that's me, Celestina Grande. No relation to Ariana Grande. All right. So what is a victim advocate? We're professionals. We're trained to support victims of a crime. We offer the victims information support. We help them fill out paperwork. And you're going to hear from the Office of the Attorney General, Crime Victims Compensation, later in this presentation. And that is a lot of the paperwork that we help these survivors and the victims with. We also help them with filing for protective orders. If there's not an arrest made, sometimes, they need it, and we can guide them in the process and, get that application kind of sent in on their behalf for them. We have to remember that in a time of crisis, they're not necessarily thinking of what they need. They're just thinking of what is transpired and why the police are at my door and what am I going to do for the rest of the night. So we have our roles in our training. We come with various backgrounds. My background, I was a juvenile probation officer before coming into advocacy. I also did campus-based interventions for alternative campuses in the public school system. So we were trying to, kind of get in there and stop them from being involved in systems. A lot of them were already there. Advocacy for me was a much better fit, much more of a passion. That was something that survivors were coming to me for, or that I could offer. And they don't have to take the help. They could come back when they're ready. Being a juvenile probation officer, it was a mandated court order. They had to follow that. So I was more heavy-handed. It wasn't quite the role that I was looking for. So as an advocate, we're the helping hand where we can be. So a little bit about what we do. Initially, we'll review the offense report. Sometimes we have the detectives come directly to us and say, I really need you guys to get on this case now. Or if we're on call, we're working directly with the victim out on scene. We're going to make sure that their safety is primary and most important. Sometimes, and I have found this to be very helpful, we assist the detectives in investigation. And I think we're kind of, we're impactful. We can make a difference for that investigation. We're civilians. We don't come in with a badge. We don't carry any kind of armor on us. We don't have any weapons on us. We don't come in with that. So we're a little softer. We look like just a regular person. And so we come in and we offer our services. We kind of, let them know what we can offer, what we do. But then it helps the investigation and it helps the detectives with the case sometimes to get those charges filed, to find the offender when the family or the survivor wants to cooperate a little bit better. We provide translation as well. Sometimes the assigned detective may not, speak Spanish. And we're in Texas, so guess what? We're going to have a lot of Spanish speakers. So we can offer that as well. Especially like with the sexual assault cases, they may be more comfortable speaking with the female versus a male detective. So I feel like we offer that buffer for them. It's a good thing to have, and we are always on call. So we rotate. When we're on call, we start on a Friday morning and we end on that Monday, the following 7-day Monday morning. So 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. If something happens, we're going to be out there. So we also help with finding medical services for them. We work a lot with the hospitals and their social workers. There's a lot of communication that goes both ways. Victims of sexual assault, guiding them with those SANE exams and helping them to get the therapy and the resources that they're needing. So there's a lot of resource linkage that we do. We also provide the information, I talked about it earlier, about the protective orders and crime victims compensation. That is one of the biggest things that we work on here within the office. We're an important piece because crime victims is going to ask for that offense report. They want to know who the assigned detective is. They want to speak with them personally sometimes. So we're able to communicate with the detective. They're not always 8 to 5, they're out in the field, they're out doing their investigation piece. So we're able to communicate with them, provide crime victims resources and with the information that they're requiring. We also provide crisis intervention sometimes. We're that emotional support. Like I said, sometimes we're just a listening ear. There are many times that I'll get a phone call. There's not an immediate need. This is something that has happened months ago. They're safe. They just want to talk. They just want to know, what are the next steps? What are my options? What can I do? If we don't know, we're going to find that. We're going to find that because we're not involved. So we can think a little bit beyond that. And if you're in the situation, your main focus is survival. How am I going to survive? So we have so many hats that we wear. Oftentimes when I get a case and I talk to the victim initially, I will explain to them, there's probably nothing that you're going to ask me for today or that is at the forefront of what you know you need. Sometimes they say nothing. They're safe. They're with a family member. There's been an arrest made. There's no bond. He's not coming out, or whatever the case may be. So there's nothing that they need at that point. But at least they know that we're here and that they can revert back to calling us. So a lot of us, like I talked about myself, my background is juvenile probation. So I was in the criminal justice system. A lot of us have a background in social work, education, psychology. We bring a lot of different experiences to the table. There are 7 of us who have different backgrounds, have experienced different things, and sometimes we can collaborate together when we have a specific case that might not be something that we've seen before. So I welcome that, and I think it's very important. The most important thing from this information here is we don't tell victims what to do. We'll never tell a victim that they have to leave. We will suggest it for their safety, but we will never tell them what they have to do. That is something that they have to come to the conclusion or the understanding that maybe it's time. Maybe they're not ready. And for reasons beyond our understanding, that's okay. That's okay. We just empower them and we give them the information that they need. We encourage them to continuously call law enforcement. And I remind them all the time, you're not a burden. That is our job. We work for a law enforcement agency, and a law enforcement officer's job is to be there for the public. We maintain confidentiality. We don't share information. If you tell us, you're moving, that sometimes that information is not going to be publicized anywhere. It goes nowhere. It remains with us. And we understand that if you are a victim, it is very difficult to reach out for help. There is a lot of shame that goes with it. There's a lot of self-blame sometimes we understand that goes with it. So we understand that, but we have to make it a safe space for you. We want to make those conversations safe for you. We want to help any, family member. Oftentimes with cases, I tell my survivor, the victim that I'm working with, I'm not just helping you, I'm helping the family. I'm helping your neighbor, whoever witnessed this, whoever have been involved. It goes far beyond that. Working with violent crimes, sometimes, a robbery could have happened at a local gas station and you were just there pumping gas, but you witnessed it and somebody got killed. It goes beyond just the person, that was victimized. So I think that's an important thing too. And then there's the piece about crime victims compensation. I won't go too far into that because we do have a representative here that will explain that. We offer it. You are well within your right to file for crime victims compensation, and we assist you with that application. We have them in English and in Spanish. We can do them virtually. We can do them in office. We can meet you out at a Starbucks in the community. So, sometimes, especially with the homicide cases, the funeral homes get those before we do. And so we can submit them on the family's behalf. So that's what we do here as advocates in a nutshell. I'm very proud of the job that we do here. I think we do an amazing job, and I am excited to see advocacy go further within criminal justice. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Celeste, for sharing all of that information. This was really helpful and informative. So thank you so much for that. I have received a couple of questions here, and just for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and ask them. And so this first question, can you talk about like how do you, in your work, how do you approach whenever you're trying to inform a victim or a survivor of their rights? How do you kind of approach that situation? I know it's kind of a broad, question, but anything that you can share about that?
So as far as like informing the victim of their rights, we do offer them we provide them with a folder, and it has a lot of information in it. What I try to explain to them is right now, and a lot of times, unfortunately, when we are dealing with victims, they're in crisis. It's immediate. It's right now. It just happened. They're not receptive and responsive to any information that we're giving them. Well, for myself, the biggest thing I'll tell them is this is my card. We're able to communicate with them by text message sometimes because they don't want to talk on the phone, or maybe they can't. And it's a much safer and confidential way of just sending a text message. So we give them all that information within a folder, and then we connect them with the resources that are specific for what they're requiring. So
That makes sense. Thank you. And so our next question, just in your own experience, can you talk about like some of the challenges that you've encountered? Have you mentioned that you've been, with your current agency for about 3 years now? And so
yes.
just can you talk a little bit about the challenges or hurdles that you've faced throughout your time with the sheriff's office?
So I would say some of the challenges are just, that keeping advocacy at the forefront of law enforcement when they're out there. I understand that, the primary focus of law enforcement is to, protect, you're protecting, and you want to make that arrest if necessary. But what happens after that arrest? And I really want them to be mindful that we're here. Let us help them, let us help them, because there are survivors out there and they're hurting still and they need help. And there's so many, avenues in which ways we can help them. So I think that would be the biggest hurdle, just to continue to remind, not just our law enforcement, but law enforcement as a whole, that there is help out there.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Celeste. We do have another question. And so this is about, like in your department specifically, is there a protocol in place to safeguard victims from potential retaliation after a perpetrator has been convicted? And so in other words, does your department provide support to victims even after a solution has been found?
Yes, absolutely. Like I explained earlier, we never close that door on a victim or a survivor and their family. Absolutely. We will continue to work with them even after an arrest is made, even after they've gone to court and maybe they were found not guilty and nothing transpired with it. So yes, absolutely. We go as far as we can with it. We can, we work on helping them to apply for U visas so that they can, be lawfully here, so that they can participate with trials to ensure that, that perpetrator is brought to justice. So there are very many things that we can do beyond just, in that time frame. It doesn't have to be just out at the scene. We go on and, for however long they need us, basically.
That's really great information and great to hear. Thank you. We do have another question just on this topic of vicarious trauma, which we probably all are familiar with. So just in your own experience in your own day-to-day, how do you take care of yourself working, in this field?
It's hard. And I will tell you that our department does a tremendous job of making sure that we take care of our mental health. We have a mental health unit within our agency that we're, able to make an appointment with. It's confidential. There's no charge to us. We can go in and we can just, talk to a professional, because what we hear and what we endure and vicarious trauma is real. It happens. Some days at the end of that day, whenever the end of that day is, whether it's 2 a.m. or 5 o'clock, you have to step back and take that deep breath, and just hope that we did exactly what we were supposed to do. And then we get up and we do it again the next day. But ensuring that we use our employee assistant line and that we utilize our on-staffs, like, our mental health unit. Because if we're not okay, how can we make sure that somebody else is okay? We have to be okay to be able to help. So that's a good question. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that reminder to take care of ourselves. So thank you. We do have another question. Do you have any advice for someone who's wanting to go into this field and work as an advocate, or maybe someone who is new into this field and just barely started? Do you have any advice that you can share?
I will tell you that, and anybody can tell you that working in a role like this, you don't do it for money. You have to do it with passion. You have to be a people person. You have to be able to want to know that this is the field for you. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't feel fulfilled. I may not have been able to help the person right then and there, but it's a process. It's a process. We're working towards it. If I can go home at the end of the day and know that that person is safe and that they reached out and I was able to give them all the resources that I know of and the assistance that I can provide, that's a successful day to me. Now, is it for everybody? I don't think so. I don't think so. You really have to have the heart, and it's not for the money. That's what I will tell you.
Thank you so much, Celeste. I think we have gone through all of our questions. If there are no other questions for Celeste, we just want to thank you again for sharing your time and your expertise. We really do appreciate it, Celeste. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so, yeah, thank you. And so just for the sake of time, again, we'll go ahead and shift over to our last but not least, our final presenter, Ms. Dominique Patterson, who is here with the Office of the Attorney General, and she'll be speaking about the Crime Victims Compensation Program. I know this is an area where we get a lot of questions and people are eager to learn more about this process. And so I just want to give as much time as we can to Dominique so she can, share the knowledge.
Yeah, it's on mute.
Dominique, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So full disclosure, Celeste and I are sitting right next to each other at the Harris County Sheriff's Office, if you're wondering. All right, so we were experiencing some audio difficulties earlier, so our apologies. Good morning. And just to address one of the questions about assisting victims who may face possible retaliation, specifically to domestic violence victims in Harris County, we have 2 domestic violence high-risk teams. So one in the city of Pasadena, where the law enforcement agency is the Pasadena Police Department and the advocacy group is the Bridge Over Troubled Waters. And then we have a larger domestic violence high-risk team, which Celeste Lieutenant and Sergeant sit on. And it is head up, the advocacy group, I guess, that runs it would be the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council in partnership with all the other DV agencies. All right. And so that is a big issue we discussed during those meetings. How can we prevent retaliation? How can we improve the victim safety? So it's addressed through that avenue as well. All right. And I don't use Zoom anymore because it costs money. And the state, well, the end. So I'm going to try to share my screen, remember to share my screen because I'm totally confused. Okay, you see all this state agency stuff. My apologies. I have to turn on to turn on my Zoom brain, so please forgive me. And it's taking forever. Okay, here we go. This should be the doc. Let's see, 29 slides. Yep, 29 slides, and I'm gonna go really fast. I'm sorry. It's a lot of information. I'm gonna do my best.
Dominique,
To
I'm
cover.
seeing a different screen. I'm not seeing your slides.
You're not? Okay. What do you see? Just so I know.
It's like a login
Right.
screen.
Yeah, you see my login. It should populate, but I'll stop and try it again. Hold on. How about now? Now? Yay. Wait a minute. Okay. Again, sorry. We use Teams. We don't use Zoom. Teams is free. Zoom is not. All righty. Okay. Do the work here. So the goal well, I guess I should back up. I'm sorry. I feel like this is my training because that's my job. I train and I do outreach and I do direct victim assistance as needed. So my name is Dominique Patterson. I'm the Houston area Southeast Texas Regional Outreach Coordinator in the Crime Victim Services Division at the Office of the Attorney General. There's myself, and I cover all the way up to Nacogdoches, all the way out to Brazos County, down to Matagorda, and then out to the Golden Triangle, Hardin, Jefferson, and Orange, right before you cross into Louisiana. All right, and I have 3 counterparts. One in South Texas, Central Texas, Manny Ruiz. One in West Texas, in El Paso, Christine Kurowski. And our newest team member in the North Texas DFW area, Haley Laborde. All right, so we all do the same thing. We're available to train in person, virtually. We attend events. We should be very busy next week and all of this month because starting Sunday, April 6th, begins Crime Victims' Rights Week, and this is the month where we recognize child abuse awareness and prevention, as well as sexual assault awareness and prevention. So I know my calendar is very, very busy. I'm sure everyone in the rest of the state has a lot to do this month. All right, we have great, huge mileage checks come May, right? Okay, all right. So all that said, if you like, I could drop my info in the chat and then my counterparts' info in the chat. All right, so they can come out to your event or train your folks virtually or in person. All right. So I know it says that the #1 goal in our program is to reimburse, but yeah, in this economy, we're making payments to on behalf of victims and claimants are the close family members of our victims. All right. So we award to victims and claimants compensation for pecuniary loss arising from criminally injurious conduct. Criminally injurious conduct is the first element we must have in our division when making an eligibility decision. So as Celeste said, yes, everyone has the right to apply for crime victims compensation. However, everyone will not be approved. Okay, and we'll discuss reasons why they will not be approved as we move on. So we'll move on. All right, so here's where you can find the Crime Victims Compensation information, Crime Victims Compensation Act. It is found in the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, Chapter 56B. It was recodified under the 2021 legislative session, but crime victims' rights in Texas began January 1, 1980. So any crime prior to January 1, 1980 is ineligible to receive crime victims compensation. All right, so we are Crime Victims Compensation, that is, we are the absolute payer of last resort. And that includes other state agencies. So sorry about that. That includes DFPS, Department of Family Protective Services. That includes DARS, all the other state assistance that's available to victims. They must pay first, then we pay first. So if our victim has Medicaid, that's the state's health insurance program. If our victim has private health insurance, if they're an elder person and they have Medicare benefits, they must use those. If they become a crime victim at their place of employment, they must file a Texas workers' compensation claim with their employer. Now, if the employer does not have workers' comp, that's fine. We can get a statement on that employer's letterhead to go in our file because we are subject to audit, just like many of you are. And if our auditors come in and see that there was a potential collateral source and we paid a benefit, we're going to get dinged. All right. So if the employer sends us a letter stating that they don't have workers' comp, that's sufficient. We're not reporting them to the Texas Insurance Agency. It's for auditing purposes only. And lastly, if this crime involves an automobile, our victim must use their automobile insurance first. So who is our victim? Our victim is that one person, that individual who suffers the physical harm, mental harm, or death as a result of criminally injurious conduct. And there we go again, back to criminally injurious conduct, okay? Crimes that are attempted to occur pose a substantial threat of, pose a substantial threat of public, excuse me, guys, sorry about that. I got the cotton mouth over here. My apologies. All right, so crimes that are attempted to occur pose a substantial threat of personal injury, be punishable by fine or imprisonment. That is criminally injurious conduct, and that's the first element we must have when making eligibility decisions. So keep in mind, with dealing with certain crime victims, specifically victims of domestic violence, oftentimes they have multiple police reports. Well, each one of those reports needs its own CVC, crime victims compensation application, right? And lastly, look who else could apply for crime victims compensation and be approved. Our peace officers, our firefighters, our first responders. If they are injured in the course of their job performance, they can apply for crime victims compensation and possibly receive assistance. Our claimant. So I would like to call your attention to arrow number 4. Our claimant is the immediate family member or household member. And I'm just going to put a little dot there because beyond psychiatric care and counseling, there are other benefits available to valid claimants, and I'll discuss them in just a moment. So we can have lots of claimants. Our victims, but I know Celeste can attest to this, with our homicide victims, oftentimes we have 15, 20 plus claimants on an application, and that's absolutely fine. We can have as many claimants as the victim wants or as the family wants, as long as there's just one victim on that application. And keeping in mind that the victim drives the application. Specifically in homicide and with children, we find that people will submit multiple applications for that same offense for that same victim. And it does not work like that. It is one offense, and all of our claimants are added, and all of our claimants and our victim are pulling from the same pot of money. All right. Makes sense so far? All righty. Okay, so who's eligible for CVC in Texas? A Texas resident who becomes a victim of crime in Texas, a U.S. resident, someone coming into our state from New Mexico, Oklahoma, California. If they become crime victims here in Texas, they apply to Texas CVC first. So if we go to California, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and we become crime victims there, we must apply to those states first. Now, if California doesn't pay lost wages and we really need that particular benefit, and we have the ability to apply for Texas CVC upon approval and verification, we can tap into the Texas CVC fund to pay those lost wages. Additionally, if we exhaust all of our California benefits and we still have crime-related expenses, we can apply for Texas CVC upon approval and verification. We can begin to tap into the CVC fund, the Texas CVC fund, to cover those additional crime-related expenses. Who else is eligible? A Texas resident who becomes a victim of crime in a country without benefits. If we go abroad, Mexico, Britain, become crime victims there, we can apply for Texas CVC. And lastly, a Texas resident who becomes a victim of crime defined as an act of terrorism committed outside the United States. So if you think back to the London train tunnel bombings, the Brussels airport bombing, those are examples of international terrorist attacks. If we had Texas residents present during those attacks, they can apply for Texas CVC and receive assistance. To apply for our program, our victim or claimant, they don't have to have a social security number to apply and receive benefits, okay? But they must have a tax ID number or social security number in order to receive a direct payment. So if our claimant or our victim does not have a social security number, that's fine. Our CVC case manager can apply for a tax ID number on their behalf. And once the tax ID number is issued, we can issue the reimbursement. So recently I did have a homicide victim, and his wife paid for his funeral and she was seeking reimbursement, but she did not have a social security number or a tax ID number. So we alerted her case manager, and her case manager began the process to apply for the tax ID and reimburse her what she spent up to the amount we pay on that funeral. Okay. And then just please keep in mind, resident for our program, as defined in the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, is someone who lives in Texas or in another state of the United States. They have a home here in Texas, they have a life here in Texas, they are a resident. We don't look at their documentation status. The crimes that we cover, we do not cover any financial crimes, all right? Any property crimes. The person must be involved in this crime. So it's a violent crime against a person, not property, not their finances. So assault, sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, vehicular crimes, so DWI crashes, things like that. Those are going to fall under the umbrella of criminal injurious conduct crimes, and they're possibly going to be eligible for CVC. And then you guys can see the slide. I think I hit all 3 points. I think I said this 3 or 4 times already about the criminal injurious conduct, and then the examples of the violent crimes below. All righty. And so this is where I usually take a break when I'm training, and my counterpart, my coworker in Central Texas, South Texas, Manny Reese, he does this part. He does it so well. So I'm gonna do my best to mimic him. So if you hadn't heard him cover this slide, you might want to get in one of his training sessions in here because it's really humorous. And so to speak to vicarious trauma, sometimes you do have to laugh to keep from crying. All right. So yeah. So what do we look at after we have established that criminally injurious conduct has occurred? We look at these things. One, was that victim engaged in illegal activity when that crime occurred? And as you guys see, the exception is human trafficking, because state and federal law says that the victim of trafficking, it is not illegal, right? It's fraud, force, coercion, or they were a minor. It's a crime. All right. And then also the law says that they don't have to cooperate. So that trafficking victim doesn't have to help law enforcement, and they can still be eligible for crime victims compensation because law makes provisions for that. All right. Okay. So engaged in illegal activity. So was this person, I don't know, selling drugs when they were shot and killed? We see that a lot, don't we, Celeste? And then it's going to say that in the report. So we must have the official law enforcement offense report to make an eligibility decision. What a victim is given, what the public is given, we cannot, crime victims compensation cannot use that to make a decision. In fact, there's a part of the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure that says that the Attorney General is authorized to receive that official report for the purpose of making eligibility decisions. So every law enforcement agency in Texas should be aware of this. I'm fighting with one now to remind them of what the code says. But yes, it's already provided. It's already spelled out in the law that you will give us that official offense report for the purpose of making this individual, this victim, eligible for crime victims compensation. All right. So there's no need for our victim. I know our letters sometimes can be confusing. If we've reached out to a specific law enforcement agency and they have not responded to us, we will send a letter to our victim, to our claimant, if it's a homicide or if it's a child, and tell them, hey, we have tried to contact, we send letters to no avail. This is what's still needed to move your application forward. And many of our victims and our claimants will go to their law enforcement agency and ask for that report. And it makes me so upset because I'm here in the city of Houston in Harris County, and it could take you 2 hours to get from one end of the county to the other, just to be told, well, I can't give it to you, but guess what? I'm going to send it to the AG right now on your behalf. All right. So the takeaway from that is most of our law enforcement agencies, from big to small, have records folks. If that victim, that claimant calls up their records department and says, hey, the Attorney General needs the offense report to make me eligible, hopefully eligible for CVC, could you please forward it to them? And most of them know our fax and our email. We email stuff now. Yay. If you guys hadn't heard, we use the email now. We moved into the 21st century. So yes, so that's another takeaway. Please don't go to any law enforcement agency requesting an offense report. They're not going to give it to you. Call records, call the Victim Services Division. They will get in touch with us and we will get that offense report and get that victim's claim application rolling. All right. So back to illegal activity. Selling drugs, that's an illegal activity. And most often those claims are denied. I know there's a little note there about reduction. Sometimes if it's not clear in the offense report and the investigator is not so clear if a transaction is taking place, they know, they see the drugs, but they don't know if it was completed before the homicide. Maybe our eligibility folks might approve the claim at 50%. So instead of that family and victim having access to the entire $50,000, that's the max that we could pay, they have access to $25,000. And then that means that every benefit we pay is cut in half. So we pay up to $6,500 for a funeral. Instead of the family starting off at $65,000, they start off at $3,250. And like I said, every benefit would face that same 50% reduction. So shares the responsibility of the crime. So oftentimes we're looking at some mutual combat, maybe, I hate to call it that, but outside of domestic violence. So take your domestic violence hat off for a moment and just talk about regular assaults, the bar fights, things like that. You know, I'm just so tired of you. Meet me on the corner of Main and Rusk, and we're gonna have it out fist to fist. Okay. And so that's the agreement initially until someone starts to lose. And then that loser introduces a weapon, a knife, a gun, and then the other person is severely injured or maybe even killed. All right. So in situations like that, they did agree to fight, but fighting is kind of illegal, right? Unless you're in Vegas in a boxing ring, right? Okay. So fighting is illegal. They introduced that weapon. This person is now injured, maybe dead. So our eligibility people may reduce that by 50%. They may deny it altogether. It just depends on what the offense report is stating. And as Celeste said earlier, my eligibility folks will call out and speak to the detectives, investigators, if it's unclear to them. And they want to make sure that they are giving that victim's family, access to as much of the fund as they can. All right. And it's so funny because my co-workers had me tracking down somebody Monday to call them back. So oftentimes they will reach out to me and ask me to get that investigator to call them back. And then sometimes I have to harass Celeste and her co-workers to get them to call my co-workers back. All right. So it's a little bit of behind the scenes stuff that we do here. All right. Okay. Lastly, fails to cooperate with law enforcement and prosecution efforts. And as you guys can see, that the only option is denial. And so all of our money, I skipped that slide, but it is important to know the bulk of our money comes from the state through court fees. All right. So state court fees, we get a percentage of felony court fees, misdemeanor court fees. We get a percentage of the parolee supervision fees. We get a percentage of the inmate telephone calls, and all of that money. I want to say last look, maybe that's about $60 million. And that's just from the state alone. All right. And then we get money through the Victim of Crime Act grant. So just like offenders are tried in state courts, they're tried in federal courts also, and they are subject to fines, forfeitures, seizures of assets, and all that money is pulled in Washington, D.C. and is doled out and given to all 50 plus comp programs throughout the United States and those possessions and territories of the United States based on 75% of what the program paid out 2 years prior. So this is fiscal 2025. So we're operating on what we paid out from 2023. All right. And so what we get from the feds is not even close to what we get from the state through those court fees. And I said all that to say that is why our only option for non-cooperation is denial. Because if we don't get those offenders in the court system, we don't get our money replaced, right? So that's why there's no other option there, okay? And then a little note about our sexual assault victims. So if you guys are maybe familiar about the law change, in the 2023 legislative session, where a victim of sexual assault or sex trafficking receives a forensic medical exam, that constitutes cooperation, yes, but we also need an offense report to go along with that exam, all right? And my last little takeaway for you guys here is that my co-workers in eligibility, there are about 11 of them for the entire state of Texas. They do everything they can. They utilize me constantly to get all the information they need to ensure that they're rendering the right decision for our victims, their families, and according to the law. And so regarding that suspect, we never have to find the suspect in order for our victims' claimants to receive compensation. But as I stated, that victim must cooperate throughout the entire process. The investigation, if it goes to trial, they must cooperate. And so reporting to law enforcement. So for crimes occurring right now, it's a reasonable period of time, but not so late as to interfere with or hamper the investigation and prosecution. And then we do make discretions, exceptions if this was a child victim and now they're an adult and they're reporting, or if their crime left them completely traumatized or comatose and they are unable to make a report. We do give them grace for that. Submitting an application to our office. So crimes occurring now, our victim has, or if it's homicide, that family has 3 years to submit that application. And this is our program, so we can make all the exceptions we like. So one, late filing is an automatic denial. So if the application comes into our office without an explanation, that the victim or the crime victim liaison at the police department sheriff's office or the victim assistance coordinator at the district attorney's office or the county attorney's office does not write a statement explaining why they missed the 3-year time limit. That application is going to be denied for late filing. They're going to be sent a letter and they're going to be given the option to appeal. So on appeal, they're going to be writing that letter anyway. They might as well just write it up front so we can overcome that denial reason and they can go through eligibility. All right. So we pay up to $50,000 and we don't reimburse property loss or damage. If the offender damaged someone's car, home, we're not able to replace that. Okay. And because I'm not going over the application, I'm going to have to utilize this slide. So this is everything that we are able to pay under the law. There is a section for each one of these benefits in the CVC application. Okay, so if you forget, no worries, it's in the app. And under eligibility, if the application is approved, the case manager, the CVC case manager is going to tell that victim, that claimant, what they're eligible for on the checklist, even if they didn't ask for it. All right. So this is a little bit about how we pay our medical. So we pay our medical bills according to the Division of Workers' Compensation Medical Fee Guidelines. And what that means is that we're not paying the bill at face value. So if Memorial Hermann, Ben Thompson is a bill for $10,000, we're not paying $10,000. We're paying what the guidelines tell us to pay. Okay, so we have to have a complete and itemized bill. It must be on the appropriate insurance form, have the appropriate CPT codes, descriptions before we can process and pay the bill. All right, we don't make the reductions, if you will, ourselves. We have a vendor who does that for us, and that's why the bill must be in a particular format. If our victim is insured, then we need the explanation of benefits for the dates of services on that bill to go along with it over to our vendor. All right. So one thing is missing. We're not able to process and pay that particular bill. Okay. If they're uninsured, that's easy. Once we get the bill in the appropriate format, it's going over to our vendor. Our vendor saying, hey, CVC, that $10,000 bill for Memorial Hermann, Ben Taub, et cetera, is really only worth $3,500. We will send $3,500 to the provider. It's payment in full. They cannot go back to the victim for the difference. Okay. All right. If our victim receives a hospital bill and they're one of those people that I don't want my account going into collections, I paid it right away. It was $5,000. I paid it. Just didn't want it in collections. That's fine. We're not going to subject the victim to the reductions, but we'll still need all the things that I just mentioned in order to process and reimburse that victim the $5,000 that they paid for their hospital bill. All right. So we just encourage victims to submit their bills as soon as they can, because we are asking for the complete itemized bill via mail, and it may take a couple more attempts to get what we're requesting back. All right. And remember, we only pay up to $50,000. That's the max. Oftentimes our victims are in the hospital for days, months, and they have huge hospital bills. The fund is victim driven. The hospital does not dictate how we're going to disperse these funds. Okay, so any bill that we receive from a victim or from a claimant on behalf of a victim will go on hold. We'll send a letter out. We'll ask them, how do you want us to pay? Do you want us to pay this hospital bill, or do you want us to pay the lost wages, the travel, et cetera? If we pay your hospital bill, please keep in mind this may max out your claim. So whatever our victim and or claimant tells us, if they tell us in writing, email, fax, if they call and tell our call center folks, whatever they state, that's what we'll do. We must get that back within 30 days, because after 30 days, we're probably going to start processing and paying those bills, and it's going to max out that victim's claim. So yeah, so please note that the victim drives this bus, not the provider. All right. It's our inpatient psychiatric care counseling for our victim. So we made some exceptions regarding the residential treatment, because this is basically what this is, rule in light of the things that have occurred in our state, where our mass casualty incidences, where we no longer have our victim. Our victim was killed in the incident, but we have that victim's mother, father, or their spouse, and they really, really need some type of intense psychiatric treatment. So we started to make exceptions in those cases to allow those claimants to utilize the inpatient residential treatment benefit. And we pay according to the Health and Human Services guidelines. They could max out the claim in residential treatment if that's, what they're requesting. Oftentimes our trafficking victims, that's where we're paying the facility, and it's maxing out the claim. They can stay in the facility as long as there's money available in the claim, as long as their treating physician is saying that it is necessary due to the crime. All right, and as I stated, they can max the claim out in that facility. All right. They must tell us first, though. So they must make the request to us first. There's some things that we need from the facility, from their treating physician, from other entities that are asking that this person be put in residential treatment. We need all those documents, and our nurse manager. So we have about 9 nurses that review everything that fall under the medical, mental health, dental umbrella. She needs time to review all those documents and make an approval or denial for placement. All right. So if the victim, claimant in those special circumstances checks themselves into the facility prior to receiving approval, they're on the hook for that bill every day until approval is granted. All right. And then our therapy, counseling, 60 sessions for our victim, 60 for our claimant. Once they hit 60, that's it. All right. And lost wages and travel. As you can see, our victims and claimants are participating in the same activities: law enforcement, criminal justice, medical, mental health, attending the victim's funeral. So if they're in a qualifying lost wages travel situation, great. For lost wages, we would take the victims or claimants net earnings multiplied by the disability period, and the cap being $700 per week. Okay. And then for travel, they must travel at least 20 miles one way in order to qualify. Anything less than 20 miles is not going to qualify for travel reimbursement. We use Google Maps. Pop it in Google. If you got 20 plus, you're in good standing. So we'll reimburse them their personally owned vehicle mileage, their commercial travel, Hertz, Enterprise, Uber, what have you. They travel 60 miles. Then in addition to how they travel, we'll cover the meals, the lodging. As long as they are not subpoenaed. If they are subpoenaed, that travel bill belongs to the district or county attorney, not the attorney general. All right, but they're still eligible to receive those lost wages. We can still pay that. All right. So just keep in mind that the rates of travel are going to differ geographically. Remember, urban areas are going to be a little bit more, rural are going to be a little bit less. All right, so whatever the travel rate is at the time of travel, that's what that victim and or claimant is going to receive. So lots of support for our homicide victims dependents, for our medically disabled victims dependents. So again, we take the weekly net earnings, multiply them by the disability period, and the cap $700 per week. So this arrow number 2 that talks about our family violence victims. So oftentimes our family violence victims, our stay-at-home moms, our stay-at-home dads, that abuser is the sole income earner. And now that abuser is off to jail, and our stay-at-home mom or dad is left with no income. So that's what we mean for loss of support, because they can't apply for lost wages. They don't have lost wages, but they did have that support coming from that abuser. So we can get documentation of that abuser's income. So the IRS transcript, pay stub, something from their employer, then we could pay loss of support to that stay-at-home mom, dad, and those dependents. Right. We have to verify a few things though. How is this your legal dependent? So court orders, birth certificates, things like that, guardianship papers, support loss. If they're in the home, that's easy. If the person was court ordered to pay child support, we do have to look at that. If they were not paying their court ordered child support, then we can't make a lost wages payment because there was no wages to begin with. There's no loss of support, to begin with. So we cannot reimburse what was never there. And then the collateral source. Number one collateral source for our homicide victims is Social Security survivor's benefit. Once Social Security begins to pay their benefit, oftentimes we back our benefit out. The max we can pay towards a funeral is $6,500. So everything under arrow number 3 must fit under the $6,500 cap. Anything left, that would belong to the family. We would not subject that family to $6,500 cap to transport that victim's body back to their home city, home state, home country. We would allow them the rest of the fund to make that happen. So we did have someone recently who was killed here in Houston. He actually lived in Orlando, but was from Lubbock. So we had to fly him to Lubbock, and then they did a memorial service for him in Orlando. So yeah, we can do a little bit of something, if you will, if the family is asking to have that loved one buried in the home city, home state, home country. Right? And that comes up quite a bit, the home country, quite a bit. All right, so relocation. So prior to the recent law change, September 1 of 2023, these were the only crime victims eligible for relocation under crime victims compensation. And then some of them had a caveat, like the first two, the family violence victim had to live with the abuser, be married to the abuser, or share a child with the abuser. Sexual assault had to happen in the residence in order for the victim to qualify for relocation. All right, so it's important that even now, I know it's, what is this, April 2nd, 2025, we're a little bit out from 2023, but it's still important to look at those crime dates, because just because someone is coming to you today does not mean that their crime date occurred September 1, 2023 to now. All right, so we don't want to make any promises to our victims or to our claimants that we cannot keep. All right. So this is what relocation looked like prior to the law change on September 1 of 2023. Everyone can see that, right? All right, so this is what it looks like now. So obviously all the crimes that we just looked at, they're grandfathered in, and all those caveats have been removed. So if it's family violence, it's family violence. If it's dating violence, they're eligible. If they were sexually assaulted anywhere, they're eligible. So all those caveats are gone now. And any victim or claimant can request relocation. And so the case manager will look at how not relocating this person will impact their health and safety and make the determination to approve the relocation benefit, right? And so there's like the little 2-punch combo with relocation now. The victim claimant could use the relocation benefit. If it's a homicide victim, 2 claimants could use the relocation benefit. We pay up to $5,000, all right? And then a few more things. So relocation must occur within 3 years of the date of crime. All righty. After crime, for crimes after October 29, 2007, if the victim has previously been relocated away from that particular suspect, and that suspect commits another crime against that victim, even if that victim has a new police report, new approved CVC application, we could not pay relocation benefits, right? And obviously this goes without saying, but the suspect cannot move in with the victim after CVC is paid to relocate them. All right. And then yes, now we do have a direct deposit option, and it's not just for victims seeking relocation, but any crime victim that would prefer electronic transfer of funds as opposed to a paper check, they should ask right away for that direct deposit form so that we could get the direct deposit set up prior to the payment being processed. All right, because if the payment is processed and direct deposit is not set up, the payment is going to come in the form of a paper check. Okay. Oh, thanks. All right. Crime scene cleanup, child care. All right. Property seizures evidence. So whatever our offender whatever our offender left any type of evidence on, they stepped on, they bled on, etc., our law enforcement folks are going to take that into evidence. The bedding, the clothing, things like that, iPhone, iPad, those things can be reimbursed. Anything that has a medical tie that was destroyed, so glasses, hearing aids, things like that, we can reimburse. If the offender took it, damaged it outside of the medical, we won't be able to reimburse that. And then here is all of our program information. And one last thing, this here talks about our web portal. And I know many of you out there have access to our web portal, but one thing you may not be aware of, because this happened recently, that you can submit documents through our website. So you can submit them, the victim, the claimant can submit them directly through our website. All right, and it's under the victim services tab under a victim services professional. You can submit any document through our website. You do not have to have a web portal account. And I am done. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Dominique. Thank you. We really appreciate. I feel like this could be an entire training webinar in and of itself. And so we really appreciate
It's
you.
2 hours. It's 2 hours.
Thank you so much for squeezing in all of that really important information in such a short time. We really do appreciate you. And so just for the sake of time, we did receive a couple of questions, and so I'm going to try to quickly get through a couple of them. And so just because you mentioned this portal, there was a question about how the portal looks different now, and somebody noticed that there's no longer a case manager contact. And so do the applicants no longer have a case manager? Can you speak to that?
So the web portal went through some upgrades last week or week before. It did cause a little bit of an uproar here at the Harris County Sheriff's Office. I happened to be here when they were like, oh my God, they took our ability to add police report. Well, guess what? They just restored it. So if you didn't know, our vendor just restored the ability for you guys to upload offense reports. And I encourage you to upload everything that you can through the web portal, because it looks exactly like what you see if you upload. Emailing and submitting through our online website, it may look a little bit different. So if you can upload, please upload. The case manager, I don't know what they're doing with that. It wasn't, to me, it wasn't that helpful, because you saw a name and you assumed that that was a case manager. I saw a name and I knew exactly who that was. Oh, that's Alexis, that's Central Records, that's not the case manager. So we still, that application hasn't even moved to eligibility for a decision yet. So we got to make sure Alexis has everything she needs to move it over. Or you'll see a name and it'll say Denise Holton. Well, that's not the case manager, that's the eligibility manager. She's still reviewing and determining whether or not this person is going to enter our program. All right. So to me, I think that they're going to try to fix it so you know exactly who that person is and exactly where your application is, because just seeing a name does not mean that that's the case manager.
Thank you so much for addressing that, Dominique. We did have another question in regards to murder victims. And so in this situation, is the family able to claim loss of wages for court hearings?
Yes, I'm working with one right now. Yes. Court hearings, my particular claimant, parole hearing, he's seeking lost wages and travel. And hopefully, if Valerie is listening, he should be getting that shortly. All right. Yes.
Got it. Thank you so much. And so now this question, again, related to the portal, I'm not sure if you addressed this already. This individual was asking, how do we receive access to the CVC portal in order to view the application status on behalf of victims?
Well, I could drop the page in the link. I mean, the link in the chat, I'm sorry. There's a web page where you can submit requests to access the web portal online. And let me just grab it. And I just have a million screens in front of me and toolbars and this and that. All right, so let me just grab that for you guys and drop it in the chat.
That's perfect. Thank you so
Drop
much.
it in the chat. So right here, web portal, and then law enforcement advocates. This is the home page where it's going to give you instructions and tell you what to do. If you already have an account, then you go additional user access. If you do not have an account, your agency does not have an account, then the authorized user and your agency needs to submit an application for an account.
Thanks so much, Dominique. We did, I think, have one or two more questions. And so when asking for money for treatment in mental health facilities, does the victim have to be actively in outpatient or inpatient services while filing?
No, they don't. So someone could have a very recently approved CVC application. They actually can make the request when submitting the application. So if they know the facility, they have all a good portion of the documents I mentioned, they need to submit that along with their application. So that if it is approved, the nurse and the case manager can begin to review and make the determination. They don't have to be in any type of outpatient to request inpatient treatment.
Perfect. Thank you so much for addressing that.
You're welcome.
We have one more question. And so if a CVC application is submitted via mail and the victim or claimant then creates a CVC portal account, are they able to see the status online?
So I discussed this with one of my division chiefs, and he says yes. That was kind of the workaround that people have been finding. But in light of what's going on with these updates, I don't know if that's still an option, right? So his yes preceded the updates. So, and I don't know that they could actually upload any, I think they may be able to upload documents. I'm not so sure about any of the info. As we keep making changes, and I'm sorry, they have some more updates to make. So just keep that in mind. So you may, not have access to something that you had previously. If you let me know, I'll let them know, and then they can work on fixing it. Oh, and I also dropped in the, wrong thing. I dropped the wrong thing in the chat. I was trying to drop this in the chat for you guys. This link that you can use to submit documents through our website. So any document, so the relocation, the travel, the lost wages that you cannot submit through the web portal, you can submit through our website. It's just like emailing it to us. So there's the right link. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dominique. We're about at the end of our time now. And so I just want to, again, thank you all so much for your time and for being here with us today. Thank you to our panelists, to our presenters, and thank you to everyone who was here live with us during this webinar. I did already share our post-webinar survey, and so that's there in the chat. If you all could please fill that out, we would love to hear your feedback or any suggestions you have for future webinars. And so with that being said, I think that wraps up. Unless Dr. Bro has anything to add or to close off, I think we're all set. Thank you so much.
No, thank you all for presenting. And thank you, Nicole, for sharing your personal story. We really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.